Hello, welcome to the VOICEBOX podcast. I am your host, Gabby Mendez, and today we are joined by the wonderful campaigner and writer, Patsy Stevenson. We're going to be talking all about what happens after a viral moment. We're going to be exploring media framing, boundaries, and a little bit of chat about AI and tech as well. You're in for a real treat with this episode. I hope you enjoy listening. Patsy, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's so nice to sit down with you. We've been chatting all afternoon, so I have no doubt this is going to be a fantastic conversation. You've just spoken on VOICEBOX stage as well, which is fantastic. How was the experience for you?
It was great. We all said beforehand we were a bit nervous.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that one of the questions was, how do you deal with imposter syndrome? So that was quite good to say, listen, we're all nervous.
Yeah.
No one's actually, pro doesn't exist. Just do what you can. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you mentioned actually on stage, it's quite interesting because you kind of got thrown into the spotlight overnight. And for context, for people who don't know your story, you were arrested at a vigil for Sarah Everard, and overnight, the photo of that was taken of you with police in the image was blasted all over the internet. Overnight, everyone knew your name essentially. How did that come about?
Yeah, so it's really strange. It was a very strange time. I hope nothing like that's ever going to happen again. But something like that, I think, is hard to comprehend if you've not been through it. And I mean that in the nicest way. It's an experience that it plays on a lot of different things, conflicting things sometimes. So because I've got borderline personality disorder and Tourette syndrome, my ways that I deal with emotions, sometimes my emotions are heightened to a certain level and I can't manage them correctly. So to go through that with the neurodivergence as well was a bit of a strange thing to deal with. Overnight, like you said, overnight, my whole world changed. And it was awful because it was from such an awful thing that happened. When it's tied to something so disgustingly tragic, it's very hard to even speak up about that topic. So when it happened, the way that I felt and still feel to this day, I'm still in therapy for what happened because it's tied to an event that was also really horrific. It feels like I'm connected to that event when actually the events that happened were kind of separate. So, for example, people in the media would ask me, how do you think Sarah would react about that? I didn't know Sarah. She has nothing to do with me. There's no connection on a personal level, but the event that happened to me then got connected by the media. So the media then linked us together and put it as she's the face of the vigil, which was absolutely disgusting to have as a headline. So then you've got that and a backlash. The death threats were just appalling, and I didn't sleep for a good couple of nights. I couldn't eat properly. And when you've got mental health issues, I struggled really, really badly with that.
I know a lot of press attention came from this, and they asked you kind of immediately to speak on behalf of Sarah or people who are at the vigil and stuff like that. How comfortable did you feel talking about that? Because I know you mentioned imposter syndrome at the beginning. You were kind of thrown into this world of activism. I think you mentioned on the VOICEBOX stage that you'd only attended a couple of protests before that. You hadn't really been in an environment where you felt like, that could have happened before, but all of a sudden you have this great big platform and everyone knows who you are. How did that time feel, if you don't mind sharing?
Of course, yeah. With a platform comes responsibility, and unfortunately if you're thrown into that, sometimes you can be unaware of how strong that responsibility is. At the start, when it first happened, I was in shock. I'd just been through an awful thing, and like I said, not slept, not eaten, so my brain was not functioning properly. So a lot of the things that I said afterwards, being thrust in front of cameras, having to speak on camera anyway is daunting, but not sleeping, not eating, just been through a traumatic event with another traumatic event tied to it, and then have people asking you, what do we do about this systemic issue? And I had no answers. I felt like I had to have answers because that's the way people were talking to me. And I said a lot of the wrong things. I said some things that completely hindered what other people's work was trying to strive towards. So I think when stuff like that happens, I think being informed is really important, but also in the media, I wish that when people go viral, that people just give those people a minute to breathe and a minute to think and process what just happened before they shove a camera in their face. I was unaware of that effect that was being pushed onto me. And now I know it. I can see it in places as well. When there's like a really horrific event, some of the passers-by or witnesses will be interviewed straight away. You can see the shock in their face. They're in shock. They're not processing things correctly, and they're going to say things that aren't true to life or things that don't make sense. I think, my following, I hid my Instagram. My Instagram was private. That's why I've only got like 5,000 followers on my Instagram. But my Twitter went up to about 100,000 overnight. And I was trending on Twitter and people were following me that were like, reposting my face. And it felt quite daunting that my face was not my own anymore. That's what it felt like, because it was being used for posters, it was on TV, it was everywhere. And I couldn't escape it either, because everywhere you go, it was everywhere for days. And so then to have to speak about it on TV, or at least I felt like I had to speak about it, it was exhausting.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
How did you navigate through that time? And when did you think, like now, obviously it was approximately 4 years ago, right? Looking back now, you speak so well when you're on stage, you're absolutely mesmerizing to listen to and stuff. But I can imagine being thrust into the spotlight as well and having to speak on things that you're not used to speaking to or not prepped for, and let alone on no sleep and no food. How have you kind of reflected on that earlier time? Because there'll be a lot of young people out there who are listening to this show and thinking, I want to use my voice, but I feel scared that I don't know everything. How would you approach that situation?
Yeah, I mean, reflecting back on how I was and how I am now, I think that knowledge is power. I wish I'd known a lot more back then. Unfortunately, we can't predict these things. You can't predict going viral. I would say just stay informed as much as you can, because at the time, I wasn't intersectional enough. I barely knew what I was talking about. And if you feel as though that you don't know enough about a topic, sometimes it's best to reflect on that and say, okay, what issues do I need to learn about before I can maybe speak about this properly? It's also important to know about experience. So if you've not personally experienced it, maybe there are other people who have experienced it personally who you can either ask about that issue, or they might also be talking about it. So a friend of mine, actually, an organizer, she's fantastic. And she, her name is Eleanor Michael. She says that, things should be survivor led. And I totally agree with that. When you've got experience and you are a survivor of something, if that people are doing campaigns around you, there are people that maybe aren't getting enough media attention or enough amplification for what they're doing. But when I spoke about the police, there were people watching that who went, what is she talking about? Because they've been doing work for so long to try and combat this. And that was a moment that could have been steered in the right direction and steered towards them. But unfortunately, it wasn't. And that's because it was just, I was in shock and I had no idea what I was doing. And I think being informed is really important.
Do you think the journalists and reporters have a part to play in this as well, though? Because they're always looking for a story, they're always looking for an angle. For any budding young journalists out there, how would you advise them that they approach topics like this when they are speaking to people who have just been through something, they've gone viral or they've been through something traumatic? Like, is there any advice that you can give them? Because it's often a two-way conversation, just like this podcast is as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really important to remember that people who have gone viral are going through a trauma. That in itself is a trauma, going viral. And I don't mean that in a sense of, there are comparatively much worse things that you can go through in life. I myself have gone through those things, but to go viral is to have no control over your story, the narrative of what's happened to you, your face sometimes. And that can be really scary. So, I've had interviewers who have said, I even think about it now and get upset, but they say, how do you feel when you see Sarah's face? What a question to ask me when I'm already in a state of shock and grieving as well. I just cried my eyes out, and they only show that clip on the TV because it's for a shock factor. And I think we're getting to a state now in the media where people do use clickbait and shock factor to amplify things in the wrong way. It should not be like that. It should be unbiased, knowledgeable journalism. And that's the standard that should be there.
Yeah, I totally agree. But do you feel like it's the platforms because of the nature of how they're growing in terms of algorithms and stuff, you know, to stand out and to get their news articles seen and stuff like that? We've got to grab attention. And so they're looking for the moments to grab the most attention. Do you think it's a nature of the culture of the platforms that they are now leaning into that we're in that situation? Or do you think there's been evidence of this happening for a really long time?
I think both. I think there has been evidence of it happening for a very long time. You see it with like certain newspapers that, I'm not going to mention names, but certain newspapers that will highlight certain things and make it very polarized. You know, there'll be certain language that they use to grab the reader's attention. But the same thing happens on social media and algorithms and the way that they work. You know, certain platforms reward sometimes very toxic, clickbaity, you know, headlines. And that can be dangerous, but then that's how people view things. I think nowadays we do, when we're scrolling social media, we do pick up on things that grab our attention first, and we scroll past things that don't.
How do you navigate that then when there are challenging things in the press or headlines and stuff? How do you rewrite that in your head? How have you, moved on from those situations? Or I'm sure it's still raw. Like, you mentioned that you're going to therapy as well. How do you handle that?
I think the same way everyone handles everything in life. I think it's just a process of day by day. There are things that have happened to me, articles that have been written about me, people that have said really awful things about me, and it's got a lot of attention before. As long as you know yourself and that you're doing the things that you believe are right, and that you're not hurting anyone, I think that you just need to try and stay as authentic as you possibly can. Everyone makes mistakes. To an extent, there's mistakes that just cannot be undone in my mind. But, if you're making little mistakes and you're in this space, I think you should give yourself the space to learn from your mistakes, and hopefully everyone will see how authentic you are. I'm hoping now that, a lot of people can see that I mean what I say and that I'm trying to help people. Unfortunately, when someone goes viral, it is hard to tell what their agenda is, especially if they've not
written that agenda either.
Exactly.
It's usually been controlled by someone else anyway.
Exactly.
So absolutely. What do you do then when the internet gets too loud, obviously in that scenario as well? But, there are times nowadays when it's really difficult to spend a lot of time online and there's challenging things that are happening and coming up daily in the news. What do you personally do when you feel like everything's getting a bit too much?
Do you know what? I'm going to be really honest with this one.
Please be honest.
When everything is getting too much, I sit in my bed, and maybe this is like a possibly privileged way of thinking about it, because I know that not everyone can do this, but I just sit in my bed and I play The Sims and I eat super noodles, and that's pretty much it. And it's hard to switch off. You can't always switch off. Some people have to be online, especially for work. My job is this full time. I'm an activist full time, so I have to use social media for my work. But I have a support network of lovely friends, and they also all work in this space as well. So when we need time away, we tell each other and we listen to each other vent. And I think so support networks are really important, but also finding the things that you find little bits of joy in, even just being content, is really important. I'll be honest, I had an awful time in life up until recently. I've still had really horrible things happen to me. When I was younger, I had a really, really bad bout of depression, and I had lost a lot of people in my life around me, and I couldn't function. I couldn't move. And so I painted on my wall the words "do something," and I had a little box full of little bits of paper, and they had read a page of a book, learn a new recipe, learn a word in Italian, all sorts of different things that you can do. And I just tried to do one thing a day, and one thing became loads of things. And after a long time, I eventually got myself out of a bit of a hole with therapy, with other things as well. But I think that was really important for my foundation of understanding how to get yourself out of certain mindsets. Sometimes it takes a long time, but I think it's really important to have what I call a mental health first aid kit. When things are going south, what things you can do to pick yourself back up again. Not everyone can, and it is down to accessibility issues and making sure that you've got a support network around you. But I think, that's really important.
I love that as a message as well. In my kitchen, actually, I have a calendar that says very similar things. It goes each month by month, and they're kind of by the seasons, and it will say like, go outside for a walk in the autumn leaves, or, take a picture of sunset in the summer, or, go and feed ducks at a pond. And I look at it quite often when I'm thinking, oh, it's been a really long day, I'm not feeling great. I look at that as inspiration for, things that we can do out in nature to kind of maybe step away from the online space. As much as, a lot of my life is online, a lot of my work is online. I think it's about blending the two. And I know we're going to talk later a little bit about tech and being online and having that kind of blend between the two. Before we dive into it, though, we always try and look at everything from an arts and a kind of cultural lens. Why do you think that festivals and cultural spaces like Cheltenham Literature Festival, which we're at today, kind of land differently than the news panels that you've done? Because I'm sure today's experience I would hope that today's experience on VOICEBOX was different to, going on Sky News or, Newsnight or that. Like, do you feel like it's beneficial to talk about it in these kind of spaces?
Definitely. I think it's so important. I think that the arts as a whole are completely underestimated. Although I studied physics at university before, failed, but I am sort of a tech person. I'm also into art, and I think, I'm writing a book at the moment. I very much love literature. Knowledge is power. Books are fantastic. And I think that, it's very different because it also makes things a bit more accessible to people, I think. Especially books. You may not have the accessibility to learn about certain things if you don't have access to the internet or a laptop or a phone. But a book may be easier to get hold of, especially if it's at a library. With things like VOICEBOX, it's free, so people can go there and listen to hopefully educational talks and be able to converse in that space as well and ask questions. I think that's really meaningful, and hopefully can help a lot of people as well.
Do you find that live conversations help to kind of rebuild trust as well?
They do, because I think I mentioned in VOICEBOX, we asked about imposter syndrome, and I think a lot of the time people do put other people on a pedestal. They think, this person is on TV, or they know what they're talking about. They're a public figure. I speak to a lot of CEOs of high up companies, politicians. I go to Parliament. And these people, half of them don't know what they're doing, but they portray that they do. So people think it's less accessible. It's harder to get into these roles. But actually, it's not. I think, as long as you know what you're talking about, and anyone can learn that stuff. I don't have a degree. There are people out there who have no qualifications that have exceeded in their field. But you can learn as you go. I don't want it to ever seem daunting. Public speaking is probably one of those things that a lot of people can get into, but they just need to start doing it,
Absolutely. We have a tradition on the show where we ask our guests to teach us something in 60 seconds. What are you able to teach us, Patsy? What do you think you can share with us?
Oh my God. Okay. So AI is a hot topic, and at the moment the rhetoric around it is that AI is bad and tech is bad, when actually we're using that as a barrier. The real abuse is coming from men that are creating and using this AI in an abusive way. So I think that AI is actually very beneficial and can benefit society on a large scale, but we need to fund marginalised groups who are creating and using AI and tech to make it ethical and sustainable so everyone can use it.
Amazing. Fantastic. What has led you into this? Because people very much know you from going viral online, but I know your career is going in that direction. So tell us more about that. Tell us about why that direction.
Yeah, so I studied physics at university before I was arrested, and unfortunately I failed. I didn't realise actually the reasons behind my failure at university quite a few times was because I was going through a lot of mental health issues, and I finally got diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and Tourette's. But I learned how to code when I was there. And then the years following, I learned how to code properly and fully immersed myself in the world of tech and AI. And now what I come across a lot with working with campaigners who fight for gender equality, like myself, a lot of the conversations around AI and tech is that it's so bad, that it's abusive. And that it's also not sustainable for climate change. Climate change, the data centers that are used to cool down AI and ChatGPT, learning language models, they use a large amount of water. Now, obviously, that's not good for the planet, but there are engineers who want to make things more sustainable, but they don't have the funding to do so. So I think, tech and AI is everywhere, is going to be everywhere for a very long time. Instead of excluding ourselves from them conversations, if we include ourselves and use AI and encourage people to create it in a beneficial way, we can change the way that it's being used. So at the moment, we have ChatGPT or we have AI models that are based on data sets that is heavily biased, whether it be racist, misogynistic, homophobic, but they're very old data sets. So if we use new ones, we can actually combat that and make something beneficial for society. For example, we had something called Climate GPT, which is based on data sets about climate change. So we can actually help stop climate change by using a chatbot. And there's also a guy called Hamad who has created a chatbot called Rafiki that is helping young people in Africa learn more about career development. These are fantastic ways it's being used, and that's only scratching the surface. I think the more that we have this rhetoric of let's stay away from AI and ChatGPT and chatbots, the more people that are using it are going to be people that don't really care about ethics and sustainability at all. So I think, people need to be funding it. They need to be encouraged to get into AI and learn about it themselves. And hopefully we can have more inclusive tech.
And, the people that are building in tech at this moment in time, often they're not women, they're not from marginalised backgrounds. Do you think if we don't get involved in AI, that we're missing something? Because essentially it will be built by people who, are typically white, male, cis, it will be taken away from us because it's happening anyway, right?
Yeah, I think we need to reclaim it because at the moment tech is a very male-dominated field, unfortunately. Yeah. But there are so many women and other marginalised groups that are so involved in tech. I myself am involved in tech, but I know so many great people who want to create tech for the good of society. Yeah. So I think that if we change our language around it and stop saying, AI is abusive, but actually the person who created this has created it in an abusive way and has amplified abuse, then we can change the way that we look at tech completely. I think tech is here to stay. It's been here for a long time. AI has been around for a long time as well, and it's only just recently come into the mainstream a lot more. I think during the COVID pandemic as well, online misogyny was exacerbated a lot, especially by algorithms that push certain content, especially to young boys. Now we have an opportunity to change that dynamic, to say, okay, well, the AI and tech is at the moment seemingly mostly in the hands of men who don't care about how it's being used. So what if we change the narrative, use it for good, encourage young women and other marginalised groups to use it and get involved in it, and then make sure they had the funding they need, the resources they need, and hopefully it will benefit society rather than hindering it.
What would you want anyone to take away from this podcast then when they're thinking about the use of AI? From your perspective, what would you want people to go away with the thoughts if perhaps they were scared about the use of AI or the ethical impact on AI? What should they be thinking, do you think?
I think that when we talk about AI, we need to remember that AI itself is a tool, and whoever harnesses that tool is the perpetrator of whatever it puts out. it works on an input-output basis. So whatever's been put into it will come out. So if we're, as a society, misogynistic, racist, homophobic, transphobic, then that will be amplified when it's going through the tech. If we use data sets that are ethical and sustainable, then we'll get better tech out of it. I think it's really important to make sure that we know that we're not segregating ourselves from that conversation. We don't need to exclude ourselves from those conversations. If we're a part of it, we can change things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What a wonderful way of looking at it, and also bringing your two worlds together as well, which is amazing. We always close the show by asking our guests, because we think it's so important that we have the ability to change our minds. You know, it's a lot about what VOICEBOX is about, hearing other people's opinions and being able to develop our own and change internal beliefs that we have. What is one belief that you've had that might have changed recently? It could have been, you know, something that happened a few days ago, or it could be something that's changed within a year. What's a belief that you've had that you kind of feel like you've changed?
Something I've learned is that sometimes things are completely out of your control.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of time, things are completely out of your control.
Yeah, a lot of the time.
And a lot of those times you can't hold yourself responsible for those things that you can't control, because life will constantly throw curveballs your way and you're going to miss some. And that's just how life works. But it's really important to appreciate life when it's just content, not necessarily full of joy, but when nothing so severely bad is happening.
Mm-hmm.
When you have the ability to go for an autumn walk, when you have the ability to sit down and have a cup of tea, those are the moments that matter a lot, and they shouldn't be missed.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Thank you, Patsy. I mean, you know, you're an amazing speaker. I can't wait to see what you do in the AI space, and this book that is on its way. I can't wait to read it. I know you're going to continue to change and support so many people through the work and the campaign that you're doing. So thank you so much for being so candid with us, so vulnerable. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much, listeners. We will be back again soon in your ears. And if you haven't already, please do go and check us out on social media as well. Thank you so much for listening.